Today's video, we will be doing a deep dive into the meta. Start talking a little bit about what exactly is still working, what's not working, also which lines have been really refined in terms of how you approach them, and which ones should be taking the backseat unless you find certain conditions. There's a lot of really interesting ways that the meta has sort of evolved over time, over the past week and a half. So in today's video, I want to talk about that a little bit, especially if you are still on that ranked climb journey. Real quick, I want to show you guys this as well. Normally, I don't really do tier lists when it comes to talking about metas and lines, but in today's video, I think especially mid-patches and mid-patch meta analyses moving forward, I think it'd be really great to start tiering these when it comes to talking about compositions. I think what we do for our first meta analysis is a little too early to really tier stuff, but I think at this point we can pretty confidently say that, you know, there are certain comps that are in the S tier, some in the A tier, etc. And we can talk a little bit about what each of these tiers really mean when it comes to actually categorizing each of these compositions. So first off, let's talk about the S tier, which should come to no surprise. I think this is everybody's very clear S tier. It's the same across any content creator or professional player's radar, but it's going to be Nico with 7 Street Demon as the main line, Vexotech, and Twisted Fate reroll. These are the three main lines you see that everybody defaulting when it comes to playing TFT on the rank ladder. Generally speaking, when we say defaulting, that means that when you load into game, your original intent is going to be, I'm going to play this composition. It's going to be one of the three, and then as the game evolves, progresses, and gives you units and items, you can start to think, okay, maybe I want to branch out and do other stuff. But your default line, your original intent, your beginning square, your first place, should always be to try to play into these default lines whenever possible. Another thing to note as well, the A tier is pretty interesting for this patch. Normally A tier, it depends on who you talk to, but for some players it means that if they're making a tier list and they say A tier, they're saying, hey, these compositions are not as strong, but they are still good and can net you top 4s. My A tier is slightly different. The way that I categorize A tiers is I think that they are significantly more conditional. And what I mean by that is that you need certain conditions to go right for you to actually play this line, whether that be an augment, whether that be specific itemizations, right? I think that if those things come to you and they fall into your lap, then you can consider playing these lines. In the A tier, and by the way, I want to be clear, the strength of these boards can actually cap higher than the defaults, and quite often they actually do win out lobbies in a lot of scenarios, but you have to make sure that, again, at the end of the day, you can only play these lines though if the conditions are met, and we'll talk about what those are in just a little bit. But let's go over what exactly these compositions are. First off is going to be A tier, is going to be Urgot, Boombot Urgot, and arguably strength wise alone it should be S tier because it's going to be the strongest in the game. But again, we'll dive guys talk more about that in just a little bit. Zaya is going to be representing 7 Anima, Nefiri for Nefiri reroll or AMP reroll, Fiddlesticks, which is 6 Bruiser Fiddlesticks reroll, which I think we're very all familiar with at this point. Leblanc reroll, Aphelios, which is 4 Vanguard and 4 Marksman. Again, these are all comps that are super good and can actually still win out lobbies, but you need certain conditions to really succeed with them. In the B tier, I would say that these are the compositions that are not as strong as anything above it, and they do require specific conditions. So this includes Morgana and Veigar reroll. Morgana is a really interesting one. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit, but I did notice that as well. There have been some people who have been claiming a lot of success when it comes to playing reroll Morgana, and I think it's a really interesting line, but it is very, very niche and not very common that you get to play it. So again, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. C tier and D tier, I'm not actually going to go over these compositions, but C tier we have Misfortune and D tier is Zeri. This isn't really specific compositions in mind, but generally speaking, if you're ending on a Misfortune 2, you're probably unhappy, and if you're ending on a Zeri 2, you're probably very unhappy. Now, there's been a bit of talk about Misfortune Zeri being an actual composition, and actually Kim, who is a very, very well-known player, or rather analyst, in the TFT space, but he put out this really interesting Vexotech flex guide, and he posts a lot of bangers on Twitter, so I highly recommend following him on Twitter if you don't already. But he was talking a little bit about how you can flex with a cluster of Mordekaiser, Jackson, Sejuani, and then pivot around and play different things, whether that's Vexotech, whether that's Zeri, whether that's MF. And as the set becomes more and more balanced as the time progresses, we will probably see a time where we can really utilize this idea of Exo flex and then just play around a lot of really cool lines. And right now, Zeri MF is a potential line that you can play, but it's a very difficult line to play, and not only that, it succeeds in very incredibly niche case scenarios and you have to tempo the whole time and you have to hit very hard on your 4-2 roll downs and yada yada yada. So it can work, but I don't think that is a topic that we're going to be discussing today. But in the future, if it does become a meta line, I will definitely want to talk and cover more about it. So just to be clear, in today's video, we're going to go over the S tier, the A tier, and the B tier lines, because as long as you know those, you'll definitely be able to climb with no problem. But first, let's go over the S tier, which is 7th Street Demon. Now, I'm not going to go over these too in depth because I think we all know what's going on, but I want to talk a little bit more about not just the line and like how you should itemize things, but rather I want to talk about how the approach has changed, and that's what's going to be the main bread and butter when it comes to talking about all these compositions. 7th Street Demon, I think, is that line that everyone defaults because it's so easy to default, it's so simple to play, it's very easy to navigate, and generally speaking, if you hit, you will do very well. The Brand 2 Nico 2 combination is just too strong, and getting the blow up stuff with the duo carry with Ziggs in the backline and capping out Kobuko on 9 is the way to go. There have been some variations I've seen floating around a little bit where some people, instead of Kobuko and Ziggs, they play like Urgot and Cho'Gath 2, which I think is okay, but generally speaking, it's not gonna be that great. And actually, at the end of the day, you actually don't really want to be playing those units at the end, because you actually end up capping out higher with a Ziggs 2 than I mean, unless you're like Urgot 2 and you have good items for it, and then even then it's still a bit iffy because a lot of the damage from Urgot comes from having his Boombot trait active, and you can't really have 4. It's usually you need 4 for a lot of damage, and 2 is just not enough. So that's why you don't really see Cho'Gath Urgot too often. You can use it to like flex a little bit, but at the end of the day, you really want to just be holding on to that Ziggs 2 Kobuko to really cap out your board. Ziggs holding on to usually like a Morello or your Red Buff, your Shiv, stuff like this. But overall, Ziggs is a very strong dual carry to have on the board, and that's what makes this line so strong. Obviously, you get to cap out super high with Samira 2, and Samira 2, Brand 2, Ziggs 2, Nico 2, and a Kobuko on your board, and you know, all that jazz. A lot of stuff going on, so that's really great. The way this line has been optimized quite a bit, by the way, and let's talk about that, is I think one, because it's the main default line and everybody loves to play this line, it's always like 2 or 3-way contested, like minimum, and if not, it can be sometimes in worst case scenarios 4 or 5-way contested in like very like rigid lobbies and people don't really know what the hell to do. Those are going to be like your nightmare scenarios, and it doesn't happen too often, and if that's happening, you should actually probably not play this line. But I will say though is that I think the main way that people have realized or rather the best way to play this line are 2 ways. One, if you play Cypher is the best way to play this line, and actually what you want to do is ideally you want to cash out a 290 Cypher cash out, and by doing so, and the reason why we do this is because the cash out table when it comes to Cypher, the 290 rewards table is very unbalanced. The one before and the one after, so I believe that is it's sub 290, and I believe it's after 330, so outside of those ranges. Below 290, it just sucks so much. It's usually just gold, and then above 290, it just feels really bad. It's usually like some TGs or some other stuff, and it just doesn't feel very good. But 290, there's a 50% chance of hitting a radiant item. You either get a Masterwork upgrade, which is basically a prismatic. It's basically a prismatic for your board, or you can get, I believe it is a random radiant item with a reforger, and that's also still pretty good. You can mostly use most radiants in one capacity or another, and you can always reforge in case it's not something that's really gonna fly. But at the end of the day, those cash outs are what really makes this board so strong, because usually what ends up happening is that you get a radiant item, either unique or your brand, and you just get to cap out super high. And again, if you're playing Cypher, you're usually econing a lot, and having a lot of money actually helps you hit your roll down really hard. And that's another thing I want to note as well. You might notice that Hedge Fund is actually on one of the recommended augments list here. Hedge Fund's amazing for this line, and the reason being is that you just get to basically like I don't want to say you get to open your board by any means. You can play full open, it's a lot riskier, but generally speaking, you can actually lose streak quite comfortably with Hedge Fund, and on your 4-2 roll down, basically just guarantee that Nico 2 Brand 2. And then by doing so, not only that, you get to roll earlier than a lot of players in your lobby, and that's the big thing with this composition. And the best way to play it is that you want to, 1, find some way to guarantee that you'll be able to roll earlier than everybody else in your lobby, and 2, you'll have a lot of money when you start to roll. And when you can satisfy those 2 conditions, you'll be able to find yourself playing Nico 2 Brand 2 often, both upgraded on 4-2, or maybe a little bit later if you like low roll. But generally speaking, when it comes to playing this line, economy is the name of the game. But I will say this though, you want to make sure that you don't really want to use all 3 of your augment slots on just money, right? Because at the end of the day, this comp is strong, but if there's a high roller in your lobby or things go awry, then maybe you just low roll the variance, you will struggle because you just spent all your econ, or all your augments rather, on economy, and that's not the way to go. You really do want to find augments like, I believe, calculated enhancements is a really good one for this line. There's other things as well, like blazing soul, right? There are so many good combat augments that you can utilize in this line. You just want to make sure that if you're playing this line, you're not full committing to like a bunch of economy augments just to hit your units upgraded, but then still lose out. That's just not a way to play the TFT at all. So again, really good line, very solid. Best way to play it usually seems to be from loose streak and just like taking like a prismatic economy augment, but you can obviously take any econ at 2-1 and definitely default this line with little to no reason to fail, I will say. So I think that's basically it for it. Another thing as well I think I've noticed is pretty interesting is that a lot of people like to not itemize this Kabuko unit too much. The cyber boss bonus almost always, actually it just always goes on Ziggs, just because the Ziggs 2 unit actually pumps like crazy and it does a lot of really good damage. So when it comes to cyber bossing, you don't really want to put items on the Kabuko because one, you don't want it to steal away the buff, but two, the way that his knockup works is that he lowers down to like a threshold. I believe it's 50% HP, might be 60. Nope, sorry, excuse me, it is 50%. But it goes down to 50% HP, and once he does, then he knocks everybody up into the air. So if you itemize him and it takes him so long to get low and then push everybody into the air, then there's a bit of a problem, right? You actually kind of sometimes prefer Kabuko to not be that tanky, and then that way you can just push everyone into the air early into the fight. It's like getting like a Victor cast super early, if you remember back in set 13, where Victor was always, I think, 9 seconds into the fight, but Kabuko, if you have him, you know, low HP early, he can just do his job, just boop, and throw everybody up like it's a salad and toss him up, right? That's what's really nice. Obviously, if you have 3 full tank items that you can put onto Kabuko, then you're gonna still want to put items on him, and he can just Giga Tank for you and then get his knockup up, and that's totally chill, and he'll survive significantly more and have more value. But if you only have like 1 tank item, sometimes you can just like, you know, if you have to, you're never really in a position where you just have like 1 tank item, so that's kind of weird. But if you're ever in that weird spot, sometimes you might want to think, do I really want to sell Kabuko, or do I want to sell somebody else? And you know, you can play around with that a little bit, so just saying. But at the end of the day, sometimes it does feel nice to just get that Kabuko to ult a little bit early because you do not choose to itemize him, so that is something that does exist. Anyways, not sure how helpful that tip is, but that is just something to keep in mind. Oh, sorry, one last thing to note as well. Quality over quantity is actually, so I think this is an augment we'll be talking about later as well with 7 Anima in the A tier list, but this is actually Street Demon, the best composition for quality over quantity. Items like the Varpala for Nico, the Radiant Gargoyles, or the Radiant, I believe, which one is it? The Radiant Spark is also really good on her as well. I think Gargoyles is going to be better though, because you do want her to be tanky, and that is your like main frontline for quite a bit of time, especially during stage 4. But overall, quality over quantity is super good because you get to itemize so many different units. Merlo onto the Ziggs, Zyra can hold the Shiv, Brand can hold the JG, Samira can hold an IE, that can be Jinx in the meantime. Feels very good. So this is easily one of the best compositions when it comes to quality over quantity, and that's not just me saying it. Actually, I think I found out this while watching Dish Soap, and Dish Soap was like, no, this is Street Demon is the best one, and Anima is a close second. But he did say Street Demon is the best composition for this augment, and I do agree with him. I think I haven't had a chance to try it out myself though, I will say, but I am just trying to spread the message and try to spread the word. So very cool line to be playing with, and definitely something to consider if you are playing this line. Next one, TF reroll. TF reroll, I don't think anything has really changed too much about this line. There isn't too much that people have changed the way that they approach it. At the end of the day, I don't know if this has happened already since last time we spoke about this, but to my understanding, you don't roll on 6 anymore. You roll on 7, and the reason you do that is because you can roll for multiple things. You can roll for the Draven, the Braum, the Darius, and the TF on decent odds on 7, rather than just staying on 6 for quite a long time. Also, if you find that misfortune early, which you normally do because who's holding this unit, but when you find that misfortune, you actually get to play 5 Syndicate super early, and it actually feels pretty nice having 5 Syndicate in, because you get that double Kingpin bonus without having to worry about, am I ever going to get the 5 Syndicate when playing TF, where previously a lot of players would just reroll on 6. So rerolling on 7 is really nice. Braum 3 is your ideal main tank, but Darius 3 is totally fine and can sustain you for quite a long time. Itemization wise for TF, Ginsu's Archangels is typically the way to go, +1. You can still do double Ginsu's plus Gunblade, that's okay, but generally speaking, I think Ginsu's Archangels is sort of the main way that everybody plays, and I think with Gunblade is sort of like the default build, but there's a bunch of different ways you can play it. And again, the only thing you should know is that TF is a tempo comp. You need to make sure that, you know, you can kind of slam whatever onto him, move them onto somebody else later, but at the end of the day, TF works because you get a tempo and, you know, be able to punish the lobby because everyone's playing weak boards because they're trying to default to the Street Demon or whatever. But at the end of the day, TF will do a lot of work early, stable stage 3, and then, you know, as you're trying to find that TF3 and the Braum and the Darius 3, you want to try to maintain tempo as much as you can, but eventually, as TF boards usually do, and reroll boards in general, it will fall off. So you need to make sure that if you are playing this line, that you just really try to push your tempo and make sure that you stay ahead of the curve as much as possible. So that is TF in a nutshell. Again, not too much to talk about. Draven 3 is going to be the main way that you cap out the board with Braum 3 on 7 odds. That's kind of the ideal way that everybody's been capping out. Never Zeri. This Zeri unit's terrible, but I believe we covered that in the last time we talked about this a week ago, so I think that's basically going to do it for that one. Last one I want to talk about is Vexotech. Vexotech, again, last one in the S tier. Really good composition, very item specific. Blue buff Gunblade Guardbreaker is almost like non-negotiable. You kind of have to go with these, or that's all you got. I will say though is that I think what people have realized, especially during this patch, is that you really want to play 5 Vexotech, and that might sound like no shit, like obviously, right? But I think a lot of players, especially higher elo, were trying to cap out this board too high too early. And what I mean by that is typically what ends up happening is that for a lot of players, they see this Jax and they're like, well, why couldn't that be a Renekton? And then why can't the Jhin just be like an Aurora, right? And you want to hold these 5 costs on your roll down, trying to make sure that you can fit them in. But I think the thing about this line though is that on level 8, you want to make sure that your 5 Exotech is very playable. And what I mean by that is things like your Hollow Bow +1 or Hyper Fangs +1, typically going to be Coil or Chassis for your Sejuani, or Mordekaiser for the front line. Generally speaking, because it's so cheap to get to this state of the board, you get to go to level 9 and then try to cap out there. The thing about this Vex board is this is to my understanding is this board is very good and solid power level wise, but it still loses to Street Demon on level 8, but it caps out higher than Street Demon. When you get to 9, you get to play around all these different legendary units. So the way I view Vexotech is this: I think it is a tempo line. I actually think that this line, generally speaking, I think a lot of players try to lose streak and then try to pivot into Vexotech. I don't think that's the way you can go. Instead, I think if you want to really find success with Vexotech, it's going to be the times where you were able to tempo to level 8, play that Vex, and you're angling it, and you had a good reason to angle it, and you know your 5 EXO is good, and you get to play this cheap version of the board. You get to, you know, find all your units, and you're able to go 9 and really cap out with the legendaries. Because again, this board caps out super high, and we get to play all the legendaries, things like your Urgot, things like your Renekton, your Kabuko, so the Gragas. You can get a Zac in there somehow sometimes. You can get the Viego in as well. And again, I think the fall off of Viego needs to be studied, because this unit is not nearly the beast it used to be. Aurora can fit on the board as well, right? There's so many different ways to cap out this board super high. And you know, at the end of the day, realistically, you can even just completely drop out of Exotech at a certain point and just play around like Urgot and like all these other different units, right? You have so many different ways to play this line, but the thing that really makes it so good is the fact that you get to cap out so high, but you get to stabilize on 8 for relatively cheap. If you're playing Vexotech and you are rolling deep on 8 to try to find your 2-star upgrades, that is going to be what really puts the nail in the coffin. You really want to be able to play this line when you're situated well for it, not because you were just like, oh, like, there's so many Street Demon players and like this is the only line I can play, right? And then you just forced it and then you're having a bad time. That is sort of what really is, I think, the fall off for a lot of Vex players. So, and one last thing to note is that, again, at the end of the day, the reason why this line is so good is because you get to itemize a Varus 2, and Varus 2 plus Vex 2 is what stabilizes you so hard on 8. I believe we talked about this before, but without Hollow Bow items, or without, Exotech items on your Varus, that becomes a lot harder to itemize and make sure that you're actually going to be stable for level 8. I think, again, if your Exotech does not include a Varus item in the 3 or 5 slot, that becomes really difficult to play. Vex 2 alone is not going to be enough to solo carry your board. You definitely need a dual carry somewhere, and that's almost always going to be Vex 2. Or sorry, Varus 2. Again, Hollow Bow, Hyper Fangs +2, usually Umbrello, usually Archangels, Shojin, Rabadons, anything. But at the end of the day, when you're level 8, Vex 3 items, Varus 3 items, and you want some tank items as well, Sejuani and Mordekaiser, yada. You get the idea. But that's basically gonna do it for this board. Again, I don't think Cypher into this board is gonna be really great. I think generally speaking, if you're playing Cypher, just play Street Demon, and you can still play into Vex, and I think it's okay, but it's a lot riskier, it feels like. I think you just get punished sometimes a little too hard, especially during stage 4, because sometimes you just lose against like a street demon board, and then like you're playing Cypher, so you were low HP anyways, and it can feel pretty bad sometimes. So at the end of the day, I think Vex is a great board, caps super high, but you have to get to 9 to cap out, and that can be the hardest part about playing this composition, so just keep that in mind. But anyways, still very solid line to play, just a little harder to pilot the street demon for sure. Now, moving on to the A tier. And by the way, in case you haven't realized, I'm talking kind of quiet because it's very early in the morning. It's 7 in the morning. I've been filming since like 6, so I don't want to wake up my roommates as much as possible. But anyways, going over into the A tier line, we're going to be talking about Boombot Urgot. Now, some people might be looking at me going crazy, like, why? How is this A tier? This is easily the strongest composition in the game, and it is. But the problem with this board, and the hardest thing about it, is getting to this board. That is the problem. When it comes to playing 4 Boombot and 4 Bruiser, that's sort of the composition, by the way, the easiest way to think about it. But 4 Boombot, 4 Bruiser, and the reason why it works is because Cho'Gath with 4 Bruiser is a disgustingly strong tank and can like get super big, super strong, and can actually help carry and dish out a lot of damage despite being a tank because of the Boombot trait. So this Cho'Gath unit gets really strong on 4. 2 Bruisers just isn't really enough. It definitely is 4, and you get a lot of good, strong unit quality with 4. Gragas is great for Divinicore. Mordekaiser 2 is one of the strongest 3-star, if not the strongest 3-cost tank. And Kobuko, just for the AoE CC. Fiddlesticks has to go on the board as well, just because of Techie, plus being Boombot Urgot on there as well, +1. You usually end up with a shitter, usually Kog'Maw, and the reason I say that is because if you don't have the dummy, you actually sometimes end up taking off Vex, so you just take off Executioner entirely. Obviously, if you have items for the Vex, then keep it. But generally speaking, if you want to play 4 Boombot and 4 Bruiser and keep a Garen and a Zac on your board, it's going to be very difficult because, in case you can't already tell, we have 10 units on the board, not 9. So the way you cap out with this board as well, by the way, is you either get a Boombot Crest, so you can get 4 Boombot in, or you can get a Zac on your board, a Garen on your board, drop the Vex, and you get to start farming Boombot mods. That's the real secret sauce about this comp, is that you get to spread Boombot across your whole board, and no matter what unit is getting attacked, you're proccing Boombot and it's doing a lot of damage. So the best way to cap out is to get Boombot mod onto Zac, sometimes a Bruiser mod onto Urgot, just so that he gets a bit tanky so he doesn't die to like random shit sometimes. You can Boombot your Kobuko, you can Boombot Gragas, whoever it may be, Boombot Vex if you can keep the Vex on the board, right? So many different ways to cap out this board, and it's super duper strong. Again, it is the strongest line in the game by far, but to get to the point where you can actually play this line, especially every single game, definitely not going to happen. This is definitely one of those lines that it's a fast line and you are high rolling like crazy to really get yourself situated in a spot where you can play a line like this. So really cool. And I think actually the other day Sub-Zero did a video on this one, on this line in particular, when YBY1 played it. Again, in case you didn't watch the video, he struggled really hard until he got to Urgot 2, and that is, very difficult. So cool line, very strong cap out, easily can win out any lobby, but it is very hard to get there. But really cool line. Next one to talk about is 7 Anima, and 7 Anima, again, really strong and can be good in a lot of different tempo spots. You really wouldn't play Anima unless you had a really strong start for Anima, like a Silas 2 plus a Seraphine 2 maybe, and a really strong augment on 2-1. Power leveling is okay, but I would really say, like, I would angle Anima if I had an Anima start plus quality over quantity on 2-1, or if I had support Spire on 2-1. Both of these are very strong augments. There's, again, I think we talked about this before and we covered it, but there are a ton of incredible augments for this line. Things like Little Buddies, things like, well, excuse me, Little Buddies, those are like the big one, but there's a bunch of other augments that you can play. I don't have the full list that I can think off the top of my head, but quality over quantity, support Spire, and Little Buddies are the 3 big ones that you really want to keep in mind. Those are the big, like, whenever I think of Anima, like, those are the 3 that come into my mind. So anyways, when playing this line, it's very simple. You just have to tempo. That's all you got to keep in mind, is tempo, push your lead, punish everybody, punish everyone, hit them down while they're down, or yeah. Like, metaphorically, if this was a fight, like, all your opponents during stage 2 and 3 are like little crybabies, and you're like a 40-year-old adult, and you're just like, you're just kicking them all the way down. Like, that's what Anima is. You're really punishing the low rollers with Anima. That's sort of like the main identity of the composition right now. So that's kind of how it is. Very simple, very straightforward. Not too much to cover, but I did want to bring it up because, again, you can still find a lot of success, and I've even seen it win out some lobbies, especially when you get to like Aurora 2 at the end. So very good. Next one to talk about is AMP, or AMP. I think this line is very conditional. It's really if your 3 Exotech is strong. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of people play this version of Exotech with the Fury. You play the Jax and the Sejuani. You play the Echo on 9. You just don't play the Strategist until then. But it is a very, very strong and solid line when it comes to playing around Neferi and Yuumi. This line is a reroll on 7 line. Don't get it twisted. Don't reroll on 6. You want to reroll on 7 for both Yuumi and Neferi, but you do want to slight roll on 3-2 just to make sure that you are stable during stage 3. Neferi 2 with 3 items is definitely going to stabilize you very, very hard and tempo you quite nicely throughout the game. Nidalee 3 is optional. Yuumi 3 is great, and ideally you want Yuumi 3 and Neferi 3, but you don't have to. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about my alarm. Mid-set project mentor tourney is actually happening in a couple hours, so that's why that alarm is going off for the reminder. But anyways, back to this. Annie is going to be also a really nice crutch in case you just really low roll on the Yuumis. That way, if you have Neferi 3 plus Annie 2, for example, that's totally fine. I've even seen some weird niche case scenarios where I've seen like Annie 2, Samira 2 somehow. They just skipped the whole, they just skipped everything. They just went with that and they still top forward. So that can exist, but I don't know how I feel about it, but that is a possibility. But any items are very specific. Yuumi items are very good. Again, it's blue Gunblade plus 1, usually damage item, JG, Rabadons, Archangels is meh. The Fury items, it's going to be really Pulse is the big one. I think before people were like, oh, it's Pulse or Hyperfangs, but I think nowadays, I think you're really seeing that people are like, it's Pulse or nothing. I think that's a bit extreme. I think Hyperfangs is still good enough, but Pulse is still going to be solid. Obviously, Pulse, Hodge, GA. If you have Hyperfangs, then it is Hyperfangs, i.e. GA, but still very great. And again, a very positional comp. You got to sweat quite a bit. Make sure your Fury is on the opposite side of the opponent's carry, unless there's like a Leona 2 in front of it, you know, stuff like that. So really good comp, can still very net you top 4s very comfortably, but very niche. I would say you really want to tempo with this line whenever you can, and ideally speaking, it's a line that you are playing from like 2-1, like you're like, I am playing AMP this game. And what I mean by that is like you got like a Neferi or maybe even a Neferi 2 on 2-1, and you have like a GA slam, and you check your 3 EXO, and it's like, oh, it's Hyperfangs or Pulse. Sure, then at that point I'd be convinced, yeah, you should play that line. But generally speaking, if you don't have a start like that, I would kind of stay away. I think without a really strong start that the tempo stage 2 and stage 3 comfortably, this line is significantly worse. So that's just something to keep in mind. But still, very solid line, very flexible line, but it's definitely requires a very specific 3 Exotech to even consider in the first place. So make sure you're checking your Exotech on stage 1. So anyways, moving on, next one. Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is still one of those lines that's like, it can be good, but it needs a lot of things to go right. It's very augment dependent. You want really nothing but combat augments, things like Spirit Link, things like bulky buddies, right? Augments like these are super good. Obviously, you need an artifact. This line without an artifact, very not playable. Cooking Bot 2-1, not very clickable to play into this line. You really need that artifact to really enable Fiddlesticks. Things like Blighting Jewel, things like Sniper's Focus. Sniper's Focus, I think, is sort of unanimously agreed upon at this point that it is the best artifact, and it's not close. Blighting is good on Fiddlesticks, but it's only so much better on Fiddlesticks when you have a bruiser emblem on him. Otherwise, Fiddle is a little too close to the action, and he can actually suffer quite a bit when there's just so much AoE going on, and it can just feel a little bit bad when he's too close to the front. Things like Archangel's Blighting Bruiser is going to be great for blighting, but otherwise if you don't have it, things like Archangel's JG Blighting can still do you a solid. But generally speaking, again, I don't even think I would really think about Fiddlesticks if I see Blighting Jewel. I would actually think more about Morgana, but we can talk about it in just a little bit. And again, Sniper's Focus is really going to be your green light to play Fiddlesticks. I think if you have Sniper's Focus, this line is much, much more playable. You get to cap out really high with Urgot as well with the 4 Boombot, and that will just do a lot of work. Cho'Gath is actually going to be your main secondary carry overall throughout the game. Things like your Warmogs, your Declaw is going to be super great on him, and artifacts like your Talisman, your Anima's Visage, and your Innervating Locket are all very, very good on Cho'Gath. But outside of that, I don't think anything much has really changed on this line. It's still a reroll on 7 comp. It's very, very straightforward, and still very, very fun to play, but only if you have the right spot for it. Oh, I will say this though, I think a lot of people have been playing around Chugbug recently. I don't know if a Chugbug 2-1 is really the way to go, but Chugbug in Gragas in general seems to be very, very strong. I haven't had a chance to really play it myself, but I think it's really something you would only take if you're already angling Fiddlesticks, and then if you do, then you can consider Chugbug as well. I would really only say like I would take Chugbug if I was already like angling Fiddlesticks from 2-1, and then on 3-2 I got Chugbug plus and it gave me Gragas 2. Okay, I'll consider it. And again, you need items for him too, so that's something to keep in mind. But overall, fun line, can be good, can win out, but it requires a lot of things to go right, and you need to get that artifact for sure for Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks without an artifact is just not really a unit. Next one, talk about Leblanc reroll. We've covered Leblanc reroll before on the channel. I think Leblanc is one of those units that can be good, doesn't necessarily need Mana Zane, but is so much better with Mana Zane that most of the time, if you don't have Mana Zane, it's very difficult to want to angle this line in the first place, because Leblanc 2 is not very consistent at streaking stage 3, and that is sort of the key indicator when it comes to playing around Leblanc or any 2-cost reroll, and trying to gauge whether or not it's actually a good 2-cost reroll. Jesus Christ, excuse me, 2-cost reroll board. I set multiple alarms because I am the type of person who, if he falls asleep, he will not wake up and needs multiple alarms. So I apologize about that, but I turned off the rest of them, so we should be good to go. I will say though, I think Leblanc reroll is a little more playable if you have too much value, because Leblanc reroll is really nice with too much value because you get to play Echo, Alawi, Rost, and Silas. That gives you 4 2-cost units, and you can actually reroll for all of them, and generally speaking they're not too contested, especially Alawi, and you can actually get away with some pretty nifty stuff. I've actually seen YBY1 play this line before. He was in my lobby. No, he was not. He was in the game after I played with him in his lobby, but he played this line and it was super dope. He played it with Yumi 3 and Leblanc, and it was like Alawi 3 as his main tank, I think. Really cool stuff. I will say though, Yumi 3 is definitely necessary. If you have Leblanc alone as your main carry, it might be a bit dicey. So just be careful and make sure that if you're playing this line, you are also rolling for that Yumi as well. Super, super important. But nonetheless, very cool line, very fun line, but it is not the easiest to find or play in general. I think Leblanc without Mana Zane really likes Shojin Nash's Archangels, and it's low-key non-negotiable. You kind of need those 3 items, and you should obviously like tempo slam and put whatever you can on her when you know you're given AP or whatever, and maybe they're not the exact items that you want, but you gotta put them somewhere, right? Fine, good enough. Put whatever on LeBlanc, and then just make sure that you end though on Shojin Nash's Archangels. It's really gonna be your true bis. Yumi's gonna be blue Rabadon's Scumblade, but we've talked about that already. Very simple, very straightforward line. You can also, by the way, reroll this on 7. I don't see a reason why not. If you do reroll it on 7, you can basically play whatever as your +1. Usually it's going to be a strategist, so you're going to end up playing Nico instead. This is sort of like the main way that you would play into it, and then you just cap out with the Samira on 8 if you get to find it, but stuff like that. So really, or excuse me, on yeah, no, I believe that is 8. So yeah, that's gonna basically do it for that line. But very cool, very simple, very cool. Too much value board, but yeah, that's basically gonna do it for this one. Next one to talk about is finally 4 Vanguard, 4 Marksman. I think this is a very common default, especially the lower elo you go, it's more common, but it's not good for a couple of reasons, and it is good for a couple of reasons. The first reason why it's not good is that it's a very item heavy comp. If you're on 4-2 and you don't really have, like, if you're looking at your board, you're like, well, I have a 3 item Zaya and I have like a 2 item Leona and I have a 0 item Aphelios, you're not gonna have a good time. This comp really needs items. Like, you really want to have that Zaya 2, Aphelios 2, and Leona 2 all 3 items, and if they're not all 3 items, you're not gonna have a good time. Another thing to note as well is very augment dependent. So I think we talked about this before, but it's really enabled by having strong combat augments. Things like Piercing Lotus, things like Little Buddies, things like Flatline. Flatline's super fucking good in this line. When you have augments like these, like, the line is much more playable because it's so enabled by having these augments in your board. But without them, like, if you get like double econ and then you play Vanguard Marksman, you're not gonna have a good time, respectfully. Like, even if you had Zaya 2, Aphelios 2, Leona 2 on 4-2, but you took like double econ plus like some bullshit like sword augment, you're gonna have a bad time. So at the end of the day, if you're gonna play this line, make sure that you have a lot of combat augments, but you also have pretty strong confidence that you will be able to find your units relatively easy on 4-2. Usually means you're uncontested. This line, when you're contested, much worse. So just bear that in mind. But very cool board as well, and just make sure you're proccing those Golden Ox, right? At the end of the day, if you don't proc Golden Ox, you're going to have an Aphelios that doesn't do a lot of damage, and make sure you're itemizing him with an IE for sure, with Ginsu's for sure. It's always Ginsu's IE +1, usually Deathblade. I still see Ginsu Gunblade, and it's fine. It's like an alternative build is a better way to think about it. It's not necessarily bad, but you are much better off itemizing him with like IEDB, right? So then that way every time he casts his spell, because that's where, you know, he's an 80 caster, that's where the main bulk of his damage is, but every time he casts, he'll actually do a fuck ton of damage, and the more golden ox you have, the better you are. A nice thing about this line as well is that going 9 is super fake. So like quite honestly, what's really nice is that once you get to level 8, you can just re-roll until you hit your proc. You proc your golden ox. Obviously, you shouldn't greet it every single turn, but you know, if you're sitting there, you're just like, I need an Aphelios 2, but it's not like my biggest upgrade. I already have Xayah 2 and like a Leona pair. Then slow roll a little bit. Golden ox, proc it. Didn't hit, it's fine. Next turn, golden ox, proc it. Didn't hit. Okay, well now I'm bleeding a little bit, so I'll proc my golden ox and I'll make sure I hit this time, right? Stuff like that. But making sure that you're really just proccing golden ox as much as you can is super good in this line, and that's what really brings this composition quite up. But I think you guys already knew that if you watched this last week. So anyways, that's basically gonna do it for this line. Again, nothing much has changed too much about this. It's a tempo line. You need a lot of items, and it's good uncontested, but contested, meh, shaky and augment dependent, but still very solid line. All right, next one, B tier. Now, we talked about Morgana reroll a little bit last week, I think, in the original meta-analysis, and it's still very good, and the stats still support Blighting plus blue buff and 1, usually Gunblade, but I will say this, though, I think this line does fall off a cliff. It's still good enough to top 4 with, and I did it earlier today, but it can be shaky for sure. You definitely want to get the 6 bruiser. That's going to be like your real big power spike. I think if you're stuck on 4 bruiser with like the Mundo 3 and the Alistar 3, you're not going to have a good time. You definitely want to get the 6 for sure. Cho'Gath 2 is going to be your main primary tank for certain. If you don't have that Cho'Gath 2, that's gonna be a problem. Alistar 3 and Mundo 3 are really good for like the early to mid game, but late game you want to really put those tank items onto Cho'Gath when you can. Cho'Gath is really going to be your secondary damage dealer, if you will. Typically speaking, you do end up with 6 bruiser plus the Morgana, and then this is with bruiser crest, so obviously like you'd have a 6th bruiser on the board on level 8 typically, but generally speaking, with this line, blue buff Blighting is going to make it much more valuable. Obviously, we've talked about this last week as well, but Bruiser Crest on the Morgana is going to be the best way to really cap out this board super high with Blighting, because the interaction is nuts. But with that being said, without the Bruiser Crest, I would say this line is kind of mid, to be completely honest with you. I just don't find it that appealing. I think at the end of the day, there are augments that can really enable it. Things like Reinforcing Scalegature, things like Bulky Buddy, Spirit Link. These are all great augments, but without Blighting Jewel on Morgana, I don't think this line is very playable. But with that being said, very interesting on Twitter the other day, somebody had mentioned that they actually, for prepping EWC, they actually played the Morgana reroll line a couple of times, but with a bit of a twist, and that is with Vanguard in the front line, which I thought was pretty interesting. I think this line actually has a lot of potential, and I've actually played it before and top 2'd with it. But I will say though, I think it's very augment dependent, and quite honestly, I think that if you don't get prismatic investment strategy, I am significantly more skeptical about this line, especially without Blighting Jewel. When I played it, I actually didn't have Blighting Jewel on my Morgana, and I actually have Blue Gunblade and like Rabadons or something, or JG. I think it's just tempo slamming, but for a reroll line, Morgana 2 is super strong. It's actually the strongest one cost unit you can have on your board. So when you're playing this line, it's actually a tempo reroll line, which is not something we see too often. Usually when you think about reroll, you are losing a lot of the early game. But when it comes to this line in particular, because Morgana 2 and Vi 2 is so strong, you can actually tempo stage 2 relatively comfortably. You don't get that 5 win most of the time, but sometimes you'll scam it anyways, and you will have a very good time. And actually going to stage 3, you will usually have a decent amount of HP. So all things considered, it's actually a very nice line, because your stage 2 is usually decently smooth sailing, and stage 3 you're very stable, and then stage 4 comes along, and but at that point it's a 1 cost reroll line, so you should have hit at this point, and life is good, and you actually get his tempo quite a bit throughout stage 4. I will say again, investment strategy, the prismatic is what really feels like it enables the line heavily, but there are augments like Spirit Link, augments like Bulky Buddies. Defensive combat augments are really like the best things that you can ask for your board. That's going to be what really pushes this over the edge. Vi is going to be your main tank for quite a long time until you get to that Leona 2, and even then though, with investment strategy, I would just keep the items on the Vi 3. Obviously it depends. If you're not playing investment, then you know, play by ear. Vi can also hold like 80 booster items if necessary. It's not going to be a very common thing that's going to happen when playing this line, but if you find yourself with a lot of swords and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, Vi can actually be the item holder for said stuff. It's not going to be great, but it's something that exists in case you absolutely need it. Again, this is a tempo line though, so like you will fall off. So when you're playing this line, and you're like, I could level, or I could just greed my econ for like one more round and then level on like, you know, on a standard interval, you should probably level if you're unsure about winning your fights. You should be constantly scouting and making sure that you are winning your fights, especially during stage 2 to 4 when you are playing this board. So yeah, very cool line. But I think that's basically going to cover everything. Did we cover all the B tier? Oh, we did not cover Veigar reroll. Veigar reroll, I don't think nothing about this has changed. I will say though, I think the only time that this line is ever viable is with new high score, and I still stand by that statement. I think that if you play this line without new high score, I think you are fucked, because the thing that makes Veigar even remotely playable is 4 Cyber Boss, and without 4 Cyber Boss, this line not very good. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope this was helpful. I hope this patch analysis taught you a thing or two about what is currently working and not working in the meta. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Again, I am always trying to share as much information as I can, because none of this is just my own experience, right? Like, I'm talking to people, I'm watching streams, I'm trying to tell you what I see all the pros are doing as well. So I'm trying to, at the end of the day, give you guys information that I think is good quality and is applicable to your own games. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. So with that being said, hopefully I will see you guys all later. We got the mid-set Project Mentor journey, so we have people who have been personally training since the beginning of the set, and they're really gonna like prove their salt and compete against each other. It's gonna be super cool. So that's gonna happen in like 2-3 hours from now. So by the time you're watching this, it might already be happening. Check out the stream below. But anyways, I will see you guys all later if you're not gonna be there, and peace out. Happy climbing.